Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Let me welcome you wholeheartedly tonight here to our citizens' dialogue at the Cercle Cité. Last autumn, I came across a number of reports and surveys published by the EU Fundamental Rights Agency, which has its seat in Vienna, about discriminations in the EU. There are lots. I want to mention three that I came across in which I found were really quite horrifying. About 40% of Jews in Europe are considering to emigrate away from the countries of residence in the EU, where they are currently living. 30% of black people in the EU say that they have been racially discriminated against in the past 5 years. And for Luxembourg, these numbers are even worse. 52% of people of African descent living in our country here in Luxembourg have experienced hate-motivated harassment. And 4 out of 10 Muslims in Europe felt discriminated against because of their ethnic or immigrant background. Personally, and I'm sure you will agree with me, these numbers are really horrifying. So I've invited a couple of very knowledgeable and eminent people to come to Luxembourg to discuss these issues also with us here today. One of them was a director, not today, but in the past months as well. One of them was the director of the EU Fundamental Rights Agency, Michael O'Flaherty, who came to Luxembourg last March. And I wanted him to discuss mainly with young people, because it's the young people that are also going to be leading the way. He discussed with 400 students at the Forum Geestenknäpchen, because some of them have never heard of the Holocaust or are not aware of the past. Freedom of expression and its limits, these are things that need to be discussed. And in that context, I had also invited Katharina von Schlobein, the EU coordinator on anti-Semitism. I'm so happy that you accepted my invitation to come to Luxembourg. When I started as head of rep last September 2016, I think you were one of my first visitors, so thank you so much for coming back to Luxembourg, returning here. And today and tomorrow we'll be discussing with the Luxembourg authorities, but also with the Jewish community. And thank you for having this citizens' dialogue with us tonight. Katharina is joined on stage tonight by Ambassador Georges Santa. As some of you may know, Luxembourg holds the presidency of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance for 1 year. Georges and I discussed a couple of months ago about this presidency, and we came with the idea that we should be discussing these issues with citizens. So thank you, Georges, also for being here with us and for participating in this dialogue. I think it's especially important in the run-up to the EP European Parliament elections, and of course, beyond that date, to discuss fundamental rights, to discuss our fundamental values upon which the EU is built. Our partners that have allowed us to do this here tonight, I want to thank the City of Luxembourg and its Mayor, Lili Polfa, for their support for this event here tonight. I also want to thank the University of Luxembourg for being our partner. Professor Mark David Cole from the University of Luxembourg will be our moderator and guide us through this dialogue tonight. Before passing the floor to Mr. Cole, allow me to quote somebody that I have a tremendous respect and admiration for, a woman called Simone Weil. Most of you, all of you, should know her. Survivor of Auschwitz, where she lost part of her family. She was several times minister. She was also president of the first directly elected European Parliament in 1979. She was a staunch supporter of the European project, and she believed others should not ignore the historical dimension of European integration. I would like to quote her in French because that was her original language. Venus de tous les continents, croyants ou non-croyants, nous appartenons tous à la même planète, à la même communauté des hommes. Nous devons être vigilants et la défendre non seulement contre les forces de la nature qui la menacent, mais encore davantage contre la folie des hommes. We should not forget the past. We need to learn from it. And this, I think, also, and increasingly so in a digitalized world, which brings with it, of course, lots of positive but also negative aspects on the way our society evolves and develops. So I thank you for your interest in the topics that we will be discussing tonight. I thank you for your support, thank you for being here, thank you for your interest, and I pass the floor to Mr. Cole to lead us through the dialogue tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that, and also from me a welcome to tonight's Citizens Dialogue. And actually I would like to also start with a thank you. A thank you that you have attended this event in these large numbers, because I think talking about not forgetting is probably the first step to make sure that we do not forget. And that's why an event like this tonight is very important. I think the few observations that Hugo Bacchus gave us already put the finger into the center of what the problem is that we're talking about here, and I'm very grateful that we could organize this together, because I think it is an important topic, especially before these forthcoming elections, as I will explain to you in a few words in a moment. But before I do that, maybe a couple of organizational comments right at the beginning when I have your full attention. This is a citizens dialogue, so once we've introduced the topic and we've heard the speakers of tonight give a first introduction to the topic, the idea would be that as quickly as possible I can also integrate you. So afterwards raise your fingers when you have questions or comments. But being a dialogue also means we would like to keep it as lively as possible, in the sense of many of you should have the possibility to contribute. So maybe not a monologue, but instead 2 minutes sharp questions or comments that then our speakers have the possibility to respond to. And another thing that I really I'm very aware of, and I encourage that as well, we would like to have both female and male audience members to speak, so I will look a little bit from different corners who has questions afterwards. And because of the topic that we're talking about tonight, you may wonder why a citizens dialogue. Okay?
Yeah, keep it
but
closer.
You can hear me?
Yeah. Keep it closer.
Okay. I don't like these really close microphones, so maybe we'll change to the other one afterwards, but okay. Is better?
Yes. Okay. Yes.
So, on first view, when you hear this topic and you wonder, okay, 2 weeks before an important election to the European Parliament, is this the most obvious topic for such a dialogue? And I will tell you, from my perspective, it is very much so, because we have to look at this topic of forgetting about the past in a broader context. We heard a little bit about it already. We have obviously racist acts that are happening. We have actual physical violence against vulnerable groups. We have increasing amount of hate speech, not only online, especially online, but also offline. We have what I would call an increase of tolerance towards more extremist political views that maybe were for a long time off the agenda and are coming back on. We have maybe also a different interpretation of events that have happened in the past or today. And all of that you can see, microphone has gone off.
No, it's back.
Okay. So all of that you can see in the context of the values that were mentioned now. And if we go to vote for a parliament which is representing us as European peoples, obviously one of the things we have to ask ourselves is what are the values that this parliament and this union as an organization stands for. And unsurprisingly, we will find out there are some fundamental values, starting with human dignity, non-discrimination, that we have built this European Union on. And I'm pointing that out on purpose now at the beginning, because very often the perception of the European Union is, well, it was created to enable a big single market. That's true on the one hand, but that's not the full story. It is much more than that, and there is the simple success story that you may want to call it, that this is the longest period of peaceful cooperation that we have had between states in the European Union ever since this continent exists. And next year, in 2020, we will actually commemorate 75 years after the end of World War II, which again illustrates the length of period that we've had a peaceful cooperation here in Europe. But it also leads us to a second thought. If it's 75 years after the end of World War II, it means those that have experienced the Holocaust, those that have experienced living during the Second World War, are getting older and older. And that's why, naturally, the numbers of people that can give a first-hand experience are going to get fewer and fewer. And against this context, we have to ask ourselves, is this a problem for us? Is it a problem for us when we lose the experience firsthand and we can only talk about what happened in the past through books, through recorded interviews, through second-hand sources? And that is what we want to find out tonight. The reason why we're doing that is because we want to ask the question, is there a danger for our peaceful living together if there is a loss of the memory of the past? Because if that is so, then it is urgently time to consider how we can respond to this question. And I'm very happy to underline what Jürgen Kabak has already said. I think there's hardly any two better speakers that we could have tonight than the two of you to illustrate this problem and to discuss it together with you. We first have Katharina von Sturbein, as you heard, being coordinator on combating anti-Semitism in the European Union, which also indicates the European Union is taking care of this topic. But also previously she was advisor to former Commission President Barroso's team, and there she was in charge of the dialogue with churches, with religions, with philosophical and non-confessional organizations, nearly a decade now, since 2012, so she has some experience of seeing and experiencing the memories that some of these have been able to share with her. And secondly, we have Ambassador George Santa, who, as you heard, is the chair of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, and since March 2019, so since a few weeks since Luxembourg assumed the chairmanship, he will be able to show us what are the activities of this organization and how can it contribute to the topic of tonight. Ambassador Santa has, as most of you probably know, a very long and diverse experience in terms of the different places he has been. At the very end, I think it was Berlin, as an ambassador, which is the country where I had my educational background, and I think that again qualifies you especially for tonight because Germany is a special example in this context. My suggestion would be in the first round, both of you give a little bit of an explanation on your functions or on the background of your roles and how they contribute to the topic of tonight, and then we will be more specific after that, and again, you will then be invited to contribute as well. So, Katharina von Sturbein, I was looking at the title, and obviously it could mean a lot and nothing. So can you enlighten us what a coordinator on combating anti-Semitism is within an organization like the EU?
Yes, thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here with you tonight and to share a bit about the work of the European Commission in this area, but also as Mr. Kohl already indicated, beyond that. I was appointed in December 2015 as the first coordinator in the European Commission on combating anti-Semitism, together with a coordinator on combating anti-Muslim hatred. This followed the attacks on Charlie Hebdo, on Hyper, on also the Copenhagen synagogue later that year, where another person was killed. And in the general sense that Jews today in Europe are killed again simply because they are Jewish. And if we think about that, it's a horrific thought. And so the mandate that was given was to do everything possible in the different areas to ensure that we counter anti-Semitism, that we also address some of the roots as much as that is possible, and that we invest in prevention. One of my first areas, my first priorities was really to reach out to the Jewish community, and the pleasure also to have the Luxembourg Jewish community represented here tonight, and to make sure that we actually understand on the European level what the issues are. And I think it's when you look across the European countries, you see that the challenges are quite diverse. We have the different forms of anti-Semitism represented in a way in almost all countries, but in different intensity. So, anti-Semitism has been there for 2,000 years, and it developed different forms, it mutated, and never lost one of the old forms, but just added on. So traditionally, you have a form of racism, of thinking of Jews as inferior, the hatred that we have seen, and that also is expressed in a way towards many other groups nowadays. Together with an anti-Semitism that came from within the Christian faith also. That transformed, especially in the 19th century, in conspiracy theories, the idea that Jews control the world, and that is also quite prevalent still today in many circles, including in the middle of society. You would have these forms, these two forms or three forms, actually led to the Holocaust, and then you would have thought that after the Holocaust, we dealt with anti-Semitism, but no, we created new forms. So we created Holocaust denial, and the idea that the Jews exploit the Holocaust in their failure, which, if you think about it, is enormous. You cannot exaggerate the Holocaust, and I think to say that genocide of this scale and so industrialized can be exploited in the favor of the victims is beyond, but it is quite a common form today. And we have the idea that the creation of the State of Israel, that was one of the reactions also, among other reasons, to the Holocaust, is in itself a racist endeavor, and that Israel actually should not exist in this place and at that time. And that has led to a form of anti-Zionism that hides behind, that actually is just a different expression of anti-Semitism, when the action of the State of Israel, of the Jewish state, are projected on the Jews here in Europe. And we have a Eurobarometer that we published in January of this year, where we polled all Europeans on their views, on their perceptions on anti-Semitism, where 54% on average say that they see the Jews in their country through the lens of the Middle East conflict. And if you think this idea in any other conflictual area, I don't think we would accept it. And we will probably come back to this later, but I think it is something to be very clear about. The Jewish community has been here for centuries, and it's just simply part of Europe. So to make the conflict the starting point for seeing our citizens in that way has become also a form of anti-Semitism. So I think we have to be aware that all these forms of anti-Semitism are equally pernicious and need to be addressed. And then, of course, you have nowadays also anti-Semitism coming from within the Muslim community. It's usually a mix of the forms that I already mentioned. But it's important to understand that the question is, and often we talk about imported anti-Semitism, but frankly, anti-Semitism has been here much longer. And it's very easy, and that is maybe also with reference to the election campaigns and so on, for the left to point to the right and for the right to point to the Muslims. But if you really want to address anti-Semitism, you have to address it in your own ranks. And that means that the left has to look into its own biases, the right addresses its prejudices and racist ideas, and the Muslim community also looks into their biases, and it must be very clear that anti-Semitism in Europe is simply not accepted. For anybody who wants to belong to the society, the acceptance of Jewish life as being an integral part is very important.
Thank you very much for this first overview. We'll come back to some of the points later, but I first would like Georges Santa to be able to give us an idea. IHRA. So Holocaust remembrance, that is clear, but an alliance. So maybe first you could tell us what type of organization is that, and give us an idea a little bit of the working emphasis maybe of the coming months under the Luxembourgish presidency.
Thank you. I think that's already. Is that all? Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you very much also for Katharina von Schloman, because she went really in medias res immediately. My thanks naturally to Yuriko, because we cannot be more fortunate than to have such a dynamic representation of the Commission there. I was very happy that, and apologize for 1 second, I was very happy that you mentioned Simone Weil. It happened to be that I was in Paris the day when Mr. Finkelgrad was attacked. And that was one day before the cemetery in Constantine was vandalized. And when I got the news on that was a Sunday, I was then in the morning and I saw the news, the ticker on the TV. I said, what would I do? I was a bit in despair, having in mind also my function. I was not yet president, it was in February. And then I thought, well, you had no one as ambassador to Paris, you had known Simone and Antoine. And so I thought the best idea was, and I didn't even need to convince my wife to go and lay flowers to at Pantheon, which was my preferred place in Paris and not my preferred building in Paris. But that was then what I was doing. So I think the word hatred was something that was unknown to Simone Weil. But it meant also that reconciliation has to happen on the full acceptance of your past. And I think that is also something that is extremely important in our debate. Now, to your reply to your question, the first draft, first it was a task force created by a social democratic prime minister of Sweden, Persson, who in 2000 already found that the situation is going out of hand. That was 20 years ago. And therefore he called in a meeting in Stockholm. The product of that meeting was the Stockholm Declaration, which will celebrate 20 years of Stockholm Declaration in January next year, so I'm still under our presidency. Very heavily supported at that time by Tony Blair and by Clinton, but attended, there were more than 20 prime ministers who attended that meeting. The name IRA is a name that goes back to 2012, only it was before the task force. But there was no agreement at the last hour, let me be quite honest on that, to have organization instead of alliance. So what your question is a pertinent question and a relevant one. It was a compromise. And the IRA is today an intergovernmental organization which has one strength, and that is very important to know. It has the strength that it brings together in their own value experts who meet 3 days before the heads of delegation, who are to 95% diplomats, high-ranking ambassadors, special envoys of governments, and the meetings are to take place in the country that has the presidency. Now, when you are a country like Luxembourg that is always very much introduced, eager to commit itself, then we have always a presidency. We have a presidency which we have by turnus, because it's our turn, and that is the Benelux presidency which we have for the moment. But this was one where we thought that it was our turn, after so many years as a member, to volunteer and to take on that responsibility. The Prime Minister and with the Prime Minister government decided that we should volunteer. There was also, we are a long-standing member since 2003, so we were one of the only states that, oldest member states that had not had the presidency. Let's put it this way. Now, there are 32 states for the moment. 2 will probably join during our presidency: Australia in Mondov, early June, and Portugal in December. That means that we will then have, and I'm now looking at Katharina von Schubert, we will then have 26 member states out of the 28, meaning Cyprus and Malta are not in the area, but Canada, United States, Argentina, Norway, Switzerland, for instance. There are FL8 observer states, North Macedonia, Moldova, Turkey, some Central American states. And there are 8 PIP, permanent international partners, the Commission and the Fundamental Rights Agency for the Union, for instance, but also OSCE, the UN, UNESCO, and the Council of Europe. You have asked about the 2 anniversaries. You have mentioned already the end of the war. We will have also liberation of Auschwitz, and we will have 20 years of Stockholm Declaration. Now, in these 20 years, and Katharina hinted at a lot of new challenges that have appeared since Stockholm. And therefore, we believe that the time has come, unfortunately, because we would have liked not to call in for a new declaration and draft something new and have perhaps a political meeting. But we have now started the process. I think the text as it stands for the moment will be certainly modified, but it's a good text, and we'll probably adopt that on a high level during the anniversary months in January. So we will have 2 anniversaries also to organize. Normally we have the routine business plus these 75 years Auschwitz liberation and a new declaration. One point is there is a focus, but that is not only the chair who is deciding that, but the word was passed already, was mentioned, the problem, denial and distortion. And the Luxembourg will be followed next year in March by Germany. Germany will be followed by Greece. So interesting states in this whole debate. Distortion has been put high on the agenda under the Italian presidency as being the main theme under the Luxembourg chairmanship that will last from March to March next year. There are some topics that will never be mentioned, and I say that now with really very much going to the point and stressing that. Debates like restitution are absolutely banished, and a debate as Middle East is banished. There is never any discussion on the conflict of the Middle East. But it's what Katharina has mentioned. We are dealing with the communities, with our Jewish communities, in all the member states of the European Union and the other 8 states, and of our compatriots, thus. So, and I can tell you only that Israel is a member of that. Israel is a member, but is a member as all the others. We are not, and sometimes we keep, very often, we keep even too much, sometimes a distance with all Jewish organizations, because we are not a Jewish organization. There are Jewish members among the experts, perhaps the one or the other ambassador can be time and again a member of the Jewish community, but we are not a Jewish organization, despite the name. One point, since 2007, the Roma, the defense of the Roma people is part of the mandate. So we have 2 discriminations. We can't take on other discriminations, but we mention other discriminations in the text. But there is a Roma working committee that deals particularly with Roma issues. We know that there are discriminations, really heavy discrimination, also in some member states of the European Union. I think that's for the moment, I think there's a problem of visibility. So nobody, I think, or most of the hosts of this evening were not necessarily aware of what IRA is. We have that problem, and the main reason is that we are never in contact with the end consumer. We are training the trainers. We are making educational products that are coming up, are introduced on a policy-making level, and not on the level of speaking to the teachers in classrooms. And that naturally leads to the situation that IRA is not known to a large public. We certainly are trying to end it, and naturally, I suppose that this will come up. There is a working definition that has brought the name of IRA a bit more to the limelight. So I think that for the moment.
I'm very grateful for exactly that reason, because indeed, if you investigate a little bit in advance of such a meeting like today, you find out what it is. But there is, I think, it's very good and helpful to know why it was created, what is the background to it, and what is the function, and maybe also what is not the function of it. So thank you very much for that. I'm looking already with one eye to you, so from now onwards I will see your fingers up, but I would like to just pass on one thought to you, back to you. Jacques Santer mentioned that we're not anymore talking only about straightforward denial, like you said before, but distortion or trivialization of events of the past. Without meaning it in a quantified sense, but meaning it as a phenomenon, is it the bigger problem to deal with a community or with individuals that say this never happened, and which one can maybe answer quite clearly from a factual basis, which maybe in some states one can answer with criminal law provisions, which say this is a crime to deny this? Is that more difficult to deal with groups or individuals that say, well, yes, it did happen, but maybe not exactly in that dimension? How do you see this change from an outright denial to a trivialization?
Yes, I think that's indeed a very pertinent question, because first of all, Holocaust denial and distortion is criminalized all across the EU. People don't necessarily know it, but based on European legislation, Holocaust denial and trivialization is criminalized. And Holocaust denial, not denial, was traditionally a trait of the right extremists. Trivialization and distortion can come also from the left. For example, by making comparisons to the situation in the state of Israel today, that simply trivialize the Holocaust in a way that is completely unacceptable. Whatever is happening there, and I mean, one can criticize the actions of the government of Israel, like one can criticize the actions of any government, but this kind of comparison is unacceptable, and it's indeed much more difficult than to uncover or to dismantle. Let's put it that way. So it's, I think, a challenge also with regards to what you mentioned earlier, the social media, because these kind of statements circulate much faster. People stay in their bubble and start believing in the things they see, and it's not easy to counter these kind of convictions with arguments, with real facts, although that needs to happen. The IRA has a definition on what Holocaust denial is, and I think it's very good to also be able to use that in the same non-legally binding way as other definitions are being used from IRA.
So can one maybe take away from that already that it was important to find at least an agreement on what is covered by the phenomenon, for example, of anti-Semitism, by putting forward a definition and explanation, at least to have a kind of a common ground when we discuss the problem. Discussing the problem. So I'm looking into here. We have citizens' dialogue, so one more organization indication. Microphones go around, and we would like to ask you to briefly introduce yourself, especially if you represent an organization or if you have a question from an organization, maybe in one sentence who you are, who you're speaking for, and then remember 2 minutes max, and then we have the second question there.
My name is Jean Feider. I'm a colleague of Georges Santer, and I will start to wish Georges Santer a full success in his important mission heading the IRA alliance over the next months. Second, I would also warmly welcome the action undertaken by Mrs. von Schnurbein in fighting anti-Semitism and in fighting racism. I think this is a very important fight. It must be pursued vigorously and without any hesitation. On the other hand, I think that for that fight, we would need a very clear, unambiguous, maybe even a legal definition. To my mind, the IRA definition, and we told already George Sand about it, is a definition which is only a working definition. Second, it's a very ambiguous, unclear definition. And third, it's a definition followed by a number of examples. And these examples are giving examples of clear manifestations of hatreds against Jews, quite acceptable, quite pertinent. But these examples only refer to the state of Israel and to the policy of Israel. And there comes the suspicion that this definition might also be an instrument to criticize all those organizations of civil society criticizing the policy of the state of Israel. I come now to my question, which is the following. The Fundamental Rights Agency, European Fundamental Rights Agency, has rejected the definition, saying it's not a valid one. And it has taken this definition away from its website. Second, there are 39 Jewish organizations who in July 2018 have invited governments not to adopt this definition. My question is the following: do you know this position of these two organizations, and what is your attitude? What are you going to do concerning this position?
I think, well, the Fundamental Rights Agency...
Microphone.
Okay, so with regards to the definition as such, you're right, there is a definition in a box and several examples. The examples cover all the forms of anti-Semitism that I have mentioned before. So, from Holocaust denial to conspiracy theories, to holding Jews responsible for the politics of Israel, to calling Israel a racist endeavor, to all the different forms that nowadays exist. There are 4 examples with reference to Israel in this long list of examples. The definition or the document as such in the beginning says that criticism towards Israel, like that towards any other country, cannot be considered anti-Semitic. It's very important to understand that the definition clearly says that you can criticize the occupation, you can criticize the war, you can criticize the settlements, you can criticize Gaza, as you would criticize other countries for occupying, for having certain policies. So the second point is it's non-legally binding. As you say, it's a working definition. It means it doesn't have effect on freedom of speech, on the legal basis for what is hate speech and the protected area of freedom of speech. I think it's important to understand that, and by the way, Israel was the first country to adopt this definition, including with this sentence that criticism towards Israel cannot be seen as anti-Semitic if it is expressed in a way that criticism can be expressed towards other countries. I'm aware of both organizations. if you refer to another Jewish voice, is that the organization you refer to? So, the Fundamental Rights Agency actually has put the definition back on its website. It put it down in 2013 with the reasoning that it is not standard setting. In the meantime, however, the standard has changed on European level. The definition has become the standard with regards to a non-legally binding, useful tool to fight anti-Semitism. And therefore, the Fundamental Rights Agency, that is an agency of the EU, follows the policy development of the European Union. And since March this year has put it back because we had, following the adoption of this definition by the IRA in May 2016, a resolution in the European Parliament in 1st of June 2017, whereby the European Parliament by 2/3 majority adopted this definition and recommended its use and adoption to the member states. And then last December 2018, the 28 member states, by unanimity, adopted a declaration in the Council on anti-Semitism, by which the member states, and I quote that, have not done so yet, adopt this definition. So they recommend to themselves to use the definition. And next to a lot of other areas where action is needed: education, data collection, training of police, of teachers, Holocaust remembrance, all other areas. So I think it's important to understand what this definition does, what kind of instrument it is. It is an instrument that can be used, but one should not overstate its power either.
Do you want to add on that?
I suppose that a wait for me that I reply.
There is an expectation.
Expectation, yeah. I don't know whether there are great expectations, but expectation. Well, thank you very much, Jean, for also your statement on friendship.
We have on some matters we have differences, but Jean was my colleague in the department when he was the director for International Development Cooperation, and he knows how much I supported him and how much I value what he does in this field. Now, there is one point. I mean, the question was quite evident. Let me reply, because Katharina has already mentioned some very basic and valid points. In 1948, there were decisions taken in New York, and we have only seen half of the fulfillment. There are obligations under international law that the state should be respected. The state does not always respect it. And you naturally are entitled to criticize, because international law supersedes any other form of law. I would give up my statement, my function tomorrow, if somebody would tell me that I'm not allowed to criticize something where a state is infringing on international law. Full stop. Now, in the bus, when I went home quickly, I read time and again the examples, and there was already some mentioning by my colleague here. It's a working definition, and it was drafted on the basis of the work done by the Fundamental Rights Agency, and then 3 years experts. It's not like someone said, some Jewish representatives drafted that in their room at home at night with a lamp only, or a candle in front of them. And there were 3 years of discussion among experts in order to modify slightly the text that was coming from Vienna. So, and then it was a working definition.
definition. And the criteria of a working definition were already outlined by Katerina. It was adopted in Bucharest, and it was, in fact, because we have the best experts in the world on the matters we are dealing with. So it was an orientation for those, or conceived as an orientation for those academics, experts, when they deal with these problems. And then we adopted it, and at a certain moment, the society, government, states found out that there is a lack, that we don't have a text that gives us orientation on what is anti-Semitism. Very complex. Now, the definition is not certainly the best English. I agree with it. I mean, it's a compromise text. But I stress, I went through the text. Yes, the state of Israel is 10 times mentioned, included in the sentence. Yeah, well, for paragraphs, but the text includes, Israel is also mentioned when it said Israel can be blamed as another state can be blamed. So Israel is mentioned there, but I hope nobody wants to strike it out. But really, there is one swampy example with the mention of it standing for Israel. Now, I would like to have a discussion on what an example where the state of Israel is mentioned in this text I should withdraw. I want to have an argument. I stand with, except for this swampy example, I stand behind any example that is mentioned there. Always saying it's international law is not respected, settlements are illegal, we have to give full support to Palestinian people to work for the objective, which is the objective to come in union still. All the 28 states stand still behind the objective. Unfortunately, the Western community is more divided on some subject than it was ever divided. But we have still a common Middle East policy. But on the other hand, these examples where the state of Israel is mentioned are not acceptable. I mean, the examples are acceptable. The mention of the state of Israel is not acceptable there. And I don't see really the problem of it. I don't see the problem. But this is not a discussion for tonight. But I'm volunteering with friends, there are a lot of them, I know, to have a discussion in another forum and go through it.
I thank you already for that, both of you. You will add with one thought, but I think that shows that it's an important element of the discussion, but we should not reduce it only to the question of this definition, so maybe you can close that point with another comment.
I just wanted to make one remark. Isn't it interesting that we are discussing anti-Semitism in the Jewish community in Europe, and already in the first debate we are in the middle of the Middle East. So I think it's important when we discuss Europe here and
But I think the point that Katerina Furman is making is that the discussion is now focusing only on the question of the definition, whereas we are trying to deal with the topic also from a more general perspective as to whether the loss of a memory of what has happened 75 to 90 years ago is a problem from the perspective of today. And the working definition we're discussing now is one element of this discussion, but it should not be the only one. So maybe we can return to that again, but I first want to correct, I know there is one more word, but before we do that, just to stick to my rule, first a female question, so we'll have a question, so you'll have to give up the microphone for 1 minute and then you will be next, okay?
Another brave Katarina.
Yeah, so I would like to ask Katarina, so what concrete measurements does the European Commission take to fight anti-Semitism in Europe within the different groups that you mentioned, which I found very interesting? So we have the more conservative circles, the right-wing circles, left-wing circles, we have the conspiracy theorists, very big in social media, and we have the Islamic community. So what do you do against it?
Very concrete question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
First of all, of course, it's the European Commission can set certain standards and certain things in motion. But in order to really change the situation for the Jewish community on the ground, for them to feel safer and to see more of a future for themselves here in Europe, because as was mentioned, 40% thought about leaving in the past 5 years, which is enormous. Change has to happen on the ground. So what we have done, and I briefly mentioned it, we have in all areas where we could, we have passed resolutions and declarations in the Parliament, in the Council, as an expression of the determination of these bodies to act. Now, in order to ensure that change actually happens, we created this January a group with the member states, whereby we are going to discuss. First is the discussion on security on the 20th of June now in Brussels, and there will be a follow-up in the fall on education, on Holocaust remembrance, on new forms of remembrance, and also looking into existing instruments that are already there and that can be applied by others. And then we'll have a further debate next year in the spring on data collection, because we actually see that in order to make anti-Semitism visible, it's important not only to look at the hate crime, but also to anti-Semitic incidents that are not necessarily illegal. Yeah? Not every form of anti-Semitic expression is illegal, but still, when it comes to the way it reproaches the Jewish community, it creates an environment that can make you uncomfortable. So, based on that, we hope that by the end of 2020, when Germany will have the EU presidency, all EU member states will adopt strategies against anti-Semitism in the different forms. So this is, of course, up to the member states to see, where are their priorities, where are areas where they need to go deeper, where is already a lot happening, but maybe not visible or not used enough. And so we will provide certain instruments that then can be used. We've also, and that's on a larger scale, created in May 2016 a code of conduct with the big IT companies, Twitter, Facebook, Microsoft, YouTube, to ensure that illegal hate speech, so illegal according to European legislation, has to be taken down within 24 hours when it is notified to the internet provider. When we did our first check in December 2016, 28% of flagged content was removed, only 28%. Now we did another monitoring exercise and it's 72%. So we are working with the industry to ensure that they remove flagged content. The Commission has also passed a proposal whereby terrorist content has to be removed within 1 hour of legal order. And there you can see that in a way the liability is also shifting, because clearly the platforms have a responsibility to keep their platforms clear. And what is illegal offline is also illegal online. And that also means that the perpetrators of posting illegal hate speech have to be brought to court, which then means you have to increase the state prosecutors in order to be able to find these people and to train them also in a certain way. So that is a whole area. And then the last concrete aspect is that we have legislation, and I mentioned it already before, with regards to Holocaust denial being criminalized. And we are also addressing with member states the fact that this legislation needs to be applied and correctly transposed and used.
Okay. Thank you for that. Thank you for your patience. I forgot to insist. Introduce yourself briefly, now that you have to wait for so long. Thank you.
I have contribution. It's very simple. I'm a member of the European Union of Federalists, and I want more Europe, of course. So, on this, my question is linked to that. My question basically is, we heard the figures, Yuri Kobaka's terrible figures. My question is, are the figures the same, worse, or better for young people? Because you told us there is a link between human rights, last World War, and the building of European Union. This is obvious. And the link is little by little disappearing by people living at that time. So for young people, the direct link, and for everyone, not only young people, human rights is the first reason of building European Union, and all must be based on that. So I think there is a direct link in the history on what's happening today on your subject. So this is the reason of my question. And if we fail to have this capacity of dividing in us, the fact we have different culture, we have diversity in Europe, and at the same time we are participating to the same values. So we have identity values which are different, and we accept the other ones. And at the same time we have the general values, the basic values, human rights and so on, you know better than me, which us a European, we need the support of public opinion and young people to support Europe to go on.
Thank you for that. Maybe for both of you, if I may combine that question, the question of data has been raised 2 or 3 times now. Is there a support in the data that we have that it's changing for different age groups? The perception, I believe that's the first part, so is it a problem of only the younger generation, or is it a general phenomenon? Do we have sufficient data, or do we need more data to find that out?
I mean, for the data, we have, I forgot to tell that, we have a small secretariat of 8-9 people in Berlin, giving support staff to the chair. But we don't have staff that, like the European Union, to collect data. They have an agency now in Vienna, formerly it was an observatory, and now, as I said, we have soon 26 member states of the Union being member states of the area. So the work done by the Fundamental Rights Agency was an extremely important work, and we have to rely on that. Naturally, we can compile from the different experts we have national data, but we don't have the data that were provided by the Union. There are differences. For instance, it is a bit worrying to see how many of the young people do not know about the Holocaust and so on. So this is a question of education. I think it's for the European Union, but also for the Council of Europe and for other organizations that defend values, also to make sure that younger generations are aware of the common basis, because also the Holocaust is part of the common basis on which the European Union was built. And so it's a bit worrying. Therefore, we will also, under this presidency and the next year, as you have then heard, Germany is the president of the IRA, but also naturally more important, president of the European Union, that the focus will be, and there's nothing more important than education. Let's, in one sentence. The data that were collected by the Fundamental Rights Agency are worrying to the extent that, in fact, too many people know. I think there's not the tradition in the families, there's not necessarily an adequate transmission of knowledge in schools and so on. But I know the former minister has just left, and he is a good representative of the civil society engagement, because he is working for the witnesses of the second generation, taking young people to Auschwitz or to other camps. I think that's extremely important, but we have to work on it. It is not satisfactory, the results we have had in the report.
I think you see also with regards to the perception, I can now speak with regards to the perception of anti-Semitism, it is higher for young people when it comes to social media, and higher for older people when it comes to the real world. So that's not surprising, because the young are much more on the internet, and I think it reflects in a way sorry?
The evolution.
Yeah, but I mean, there is, so with regards to perception, is anti-Semitism a problem in your country on average? 50% of Europeans say it's a problem in my country, and 1/3 say it has increased over the past 5 years. If you compare that to the Jewish community, it's 85% of Jews who say anti-Semitism is my #1 problem, and 9 out of 10 perceive an increase in the last 5 years. So there is a perception here, obviously, but it's quite large when it comes to the perception of increase. But it's natural that the community concerned perceives the increase more. I think it is important also to see that young people are, while we know that on the one side they maybe take things for granted because they've never seen war and they've lived in prosperity. On the other side, we see that, for example, coalition building between minorities, between Jews and Muslims, for example, happens among young people. It's the young that engage, across communities. That will, in the end, lead to a situation whereby they are probably more prone and more capable of dismantling biases, because simply they get to know the others. And I've been very encouraged in the last days seeing young Muslim organizations that fight anti-Semitism among their peers. They are brave, and they are very, I think they really need to be supported and encouraged. The same, and it goes back to addressing the biases in your own community. That's true for all forms of biases. It's the most difficult in your own sports club, in your own family, and in your own school as well.
Okay, thank you. We've got 2 speakers already on the list, but both of you are the other speakers. So I'm going to enforce my gender equality. Is there a female question? And we first gave you the floor, and then I had a hand up here and here. Whether we list. There were 2 more who just raised the fingers as well. Okay. Go ahead.
So thank you very much for your professionalism and your work. It's fantastic. But I'm very astonished that the word fascism did not once come out. So what are our weapons against Muslim brothers, fascism, Bannon, Putin? Also, our territories which are taken by these people here in Europe. What are our weapons against that when European Parliament will be fascist? What will be our weapons? Because time flies away.
Well, it's maybe a bit of an exaggeration that the European Parliament will be fascist. Let's hope not, huh? I think that in the end, there is a solid middle ground still that hopefully will also be reflected in the European Parliament by the center parties. But it is true, of course, that on both sides of the fringes, we are likely to see increases. And I think what is important, again, is for those who want the middle to be reinforced to go and vote. Because we know traditionally, and that's not the case only with regards to the European Parliament, the more people vote, the more the center is strengthened. This is traditionally the case. And therefore I think going to vote as such is the best prevention to getting too many extremists on the right or on the left.
Which holds true as well for other problems like...
weapons we can put in, not only the voting. What are our counterparts against this force this high force, which we don't have. We don't have this violence. We don't have. It's like a sex appeal almost. We don't have this. We are peaceful, you know. But
Yeah, I know.
I'm very scared of this.
Yeah, I understand, and it is difficult. It's not easy, but I think counter speech is still very important in this.
I would like to join in the appeal because we have a burger dialogue in front of the a couple of weeks ago in front of the before the elections, and I think yes, it is important to go to vote, and it's important to make the right choice. I mean, some perhaps in the first row expect me not to make a recommendation, which I will not make. But there are a lot of different parties represented. Yes, we have, unfortunately, whether it's fascist, nationalist, extremist tendencies. And I think our politicians have to have the courage, which they did not ever always did. There's no way that you can boycott the speaking or say, I don't want to discuss with them, I take them seriously. You have to engage in a discussion with good arguments and so on. It is another question, going far beyond the elections. I was a rather docile guy. I was post 68, 69, 70. There was a lot of megaphone. I was in the southern city, and people were engaged. Paris was swapping over to Esch-sur-Alzette, and professors hated it. Nowadays, would be happy. There were times where they would be happy that people, at least young people, are engaged, defending ideas. Now, I called in my boys and said at a certain moment, I was not among those who went often to the road, the streets. But the question raised is a good one. But it means civil society has to be aware of what our values are, and they have to stand up. That is not only a question of the politicians. This is a question of all of us. And I said to my kids, you get a special dinner if for one or the other cause you go and take to the streets and you demonstrate for something, because that's the price for it. We have to defend values. Sometimes the silent majority, that is something I don't like. Silent majorities are those who remain at home and they lose the opportunity to change the world for the better. So we have to take our courage in our hands and stand up for it. This is a collective work, because also the civil society have commitments to take. And not only the politicians, there are different commitments. They are take political commitment, but the society as a whole has a moral commitment to defend the values.
I wished we had a recording of it. I wished we could extract those last 2 minutes, because then when I in my class tell students, you have to make a conscious choice, go vote, I wouldn't have to speak anymore. I would just make minutes. So thank you very much for that. We will pass on. You, I think, had there it was the question, and I always forget to remind you to introduce yourself.
Yes, my name is Henry Brun. I'm a psychologist, psychotherapist. I'm working a long time fighting racism, also in the Luxembourgish Commission on Human Rights. My question is, why do we need a new definition of anti-Semitism? We have definitions on racism, on xenophobia. So, who is interested in that? That's the first question. Second question, why do you bring in the state of Israel if we are talking about anti-Semitism in Europe? You say Israel is part of this committee, so should we talk also about a definition on, for example, racism against Palestinians in Israel by laws that we know all? So this is a question, why do you bring confusion in your work that I think is very important by bringing in the state of Israel? Why don't you take the state of Israel out of this? Because, as you said, we're talking about anti-Semitism in Europe. So I think this would be much clearer then. And I think you're a bit naive about the effects of what you're doing. We know that already this definition is used to put pressure on organizers of conferences, public concerts, so it will have an effect against the freedom of speech. You say, I believe that you don't want it, but look at the effects. In Great Britain, there are several conferences in universities that have been cancelled because it was talking about the policy of the State of Israel, and as it is mixed and on a very ambiguous manner in your definition, this makes a certain insecurity on the organizers. This is a stigma of anti-Semitism. And what you are creating is a new form of anti-Semitism, that's fake anti-Semitism. So that's not real anti-Semitism, but it's a kind of anti-Semitism. You don't know, is it anti-Semitic, is it not anti-Semitic? Well, so we don't want to have the stigma of being anti-Semitic, so we cancel that. And that is a problem.
Just maybe
that's a really problem.
Okay. I think you made your point. We already discussed a little bit the definition, so maybe we can keep it short in order not to avoid the time for the others, but maybe a brief response in addition on the point of the free speech impact.
So some of the events in UK universities were indeed cancelled because the university leadership had the experience of previous conferences, or it was more activists or activities on campus that had led to the fact that Jews on campus did not feel safe anymore. And I think that's the criterion. If, one has every right to stand up for the cause of Palestine. There is no doubt about it. But when it is done in a way that Jews afterwards don't feel safe wearing the kippah, that their mezuzahs are taken off from their dorms because that pro-Palestinian activism transfers into Jew hatred here. Yes, I'm sorry, but that is unacceptable. But that's why these things were cancelled. So it's not, that the definition as such hampers freedom of speech, and that it helps to ensure security for Jews here if necessary. So, I'm not saying that every decision on every campus in that sense has been correct. I don't know every case. But the general idea is to ensure that Jews feel safe here, because if they leave, well, it's been very bad in the past for Europe when Jews feel they need to leave Europe. So I think, let's use every measure to make sure that they feel safe here. And let's also take concrete measures to help Palestinians in concrete situations in Palestine. Absolutely, But we have to, I think, be a bit balanced in the way we want to defend the Jews that are here in Europe.
I think Ambassador Santiago have already made a very clear point before about that.
But I thought that this question was also directed to me, and I don't want to give the impression that I'm avoiding a reply. I have made the experience, because at a certain time there was more interest in the public. There might be again interest for the IRA chairmanship. That's not on a day basis, but a daily basis. But I was then given an interview to a radio station, insisting very, very, very much on this sentence, which Katharina has already mentioned. However, criticism of the state of Israel, and this was diligently cut. My intervention just before and again put on track just behind. Now, what is the idea of the chair of Yara mentioning precisely this sentence, that this sentence is cut out in England? Take that as an example. I offered voluntarily to have a discussion in a different form, because this is an evening setting event then. But let me just, because of this, mention three things. There are, as I said, I agree, there are different examples. One is absolutely swampy, I would not have put it in. But let me give you only three examples, because I'm not sure that everybody knows in what circumstances the state of Israel is mentioned. Now then, let me tell you, accusing the Jews as a people, or Israel as a state, of inventing or exaggerating the Holocaust. What is wrong with this sentence? Second example, denying the Jewish people their right to self-determination, for instance, by claiming that the existence of a state of Israel is a racist endeavor. It is not a racist endeavor because it was created by the UN. And it's on that basis that we have here the existence of the state Israel, that all those who defend the right for the Palestinians to have their own state have their good claims to defend the Palestinians, and I can encourage people to defend the Palestinians because they are in a very dreadful situation. But it's on that basis. The existence of Israel has to be matched by international law for the creation of another state. And let me give another. So what is wrong with this sentence? And now give me another example, another chance. Holding Jews collectively responsible for actions of the state of Israel. What is wrong with this sentence where the state of Israel is mentioned? That we take our communities in the 34 member states and in other countries responsible for actions of the state of Israel. That cannot be. What is wrong with this mentioning of the state of Israel? Take only 3 examples. I'm ready to discuss all the others.
I think that could be an evening-filling event, but what we do now is, in light of the time, I would like to combine 2 questions. Yours and yours, because you've been on the list for a long time. Both of you first pose them, and then we see whether we can respond. First you, then we can maybe divide the responsibility.
Thank you. So my name is Martin Klemberg, and I would like just to come back to education. I've been teaching for years, and I'm still going from time to time in school to speak actually about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, because I am committed in this issue, and I am also Jewish. And what I really see is a lot of confusion, and I feel this confusion is not only in schools, it's also with adults. There's a lot of confusion. People don't understand what is to be Jewish, what is to be Israeli, what is to feel something for Israel, but at the same time being critical. And also, the confusion is coming largely from official institutions. So I will not go too deep in this, because I think clearly it's a topic for another discussion. But I think that pedagogy is really essential. And what we are now, we are a lot with accusation, reproach, and someone was mentioning UK, actually in Germany, there have been more than 90 events cancelled, and not especially on campus, cancelled due to confusion between criticizing Israel and anti-Semitism. What I think we all agree is that the Holocaust, the Shoah, is not a Jewish matter. It's a universal topic. What I don't understand, and I still understand this as an ex-teacher, is why in school we focus mainly, let's say, only, almost at the time, on this genocide. There was other genocide before and after. And the Armenian genocide, the genocide in Rwanda, Cambodia, even of course with its specificities, each genocide had its specificities. No one wants to say this one is unique. But we hear very often, and I have to say, I don't understand. Okay, maybe it's a discussion for experts, but I am not. But all this position, yeah, we cannot compare. The Holocaust is unique. Yeah, all Holocausts are unique. All Shoah are unique. All genocide are unique because the circumstances were different, because the number was different, because it was not social industrial. But on a pedagogical level, this is completely counterproductive. People who are not all, reading a lot, thinking a lot, who are just maybe, most people just like this on the social media or the mainstream media, they don't go in the subtleties, and they say, unique? I'm sorry, and I can do this because I am Jewish and I am proud of being it. Why these people, they think that they are unique? Why their genocide is unique? So what I would suggest, and I will tell you your opinion, maybe all these actions that are developed should be not on the memory of the Shoah, but on the memory of the genocides.
Okay, so we register that, and then we add the second question before we answer. It's coming, the microphone. Just a second.
It is a completion of what has already been said. I think we have to consider the definition of anti-Semitism at 2 levels. The definition in itself and its application. the definition in itself, we can defend it, we can find many problems with it. And I think that Mr. Sander and you know also the works which has been done by huge jurists from the Great Britain, from Germany, from Belgium, etc. Huge Tomlinson made a precise and deep and detailed analysis of the definition itself and of the 11 examples. I think there remain in the definition some ambiguities that can be used by people, by organizations against the world defending the rights of the Palestinians. It is done. It is done not only in the UK, but also in Germany. There are more than 90 cases since the definition has been adopted by Germany, where some events have been cancelled. And I would mention one, Mr. Norman Pesch, who is a big scientist, professor of public law, so one of the even organized for him, and with him cancelled because of the definition of IHRA, because the people say that it was anti-Semitic. And finally, it is important also, Jewish Voice for Peace had to get the prize for peace in Germany, the German prize for peace. And the event had to be suppressed and displaced in a lot of places because of the use of the same definition. What I only want to say is the use of the definition shows that there are very likely some defaults inside the definition. And I would like, it is useful, it is important that we have a clear definition for a clear fight against antisemitism.
I think you made your point. I take the liberty as moderator to do two things, not to expect from you to answer individual cases where we don't have the facts here now. I think we can agree on that. We read a lot about them. We're not going to solve an individual case, but that's the first thing. So maybe each of you can respond to the two questions, and I combine it with my final point is, maybe you can take the answer also as an opportunity to give your final thoughts on how does this go together with education against forgetting, if I may say so, so that I have to avoid to ask another question to close. So both of you maybe answer and at the same time use it as a closing statement. You get the floor first.
So on the memory of genocides, I think it is indeed important to look at all genocides as a rule. Yet the Holocaust happened in Europe, and I think we are, for example, now increasingly paying attention also to Srebrenica, which is a site where a genocide happened. Armenia is increasingly in the focus also because there is a community here. So as soon as there is a link to the population here, there is also more attention to it. Yet there is a specificity about the Holocaust which lies in its industrialization. And you know that being Jewish better than I do. The fact that it was a systematic industrial killing of a whole people. And as it's often said, not every victim was a Jew, but every Jew was a victim. So that in that circumstance, it didn't happen only in Germany. So the plan was not to kill all Jews in Germany. The plan was to kill all Jews. All Jews, wherever. So I think there is this dimension that is unspeakable, and in any case, it is true for any genocide that reconciliation must happen. That you need to recognize it. You need to work with the community and so on. There is no doubt about it. But why is it such a problem also to
to speak about the Holocaust that happened in Europe, and where almost every country in Europe and all Jews in Europe were concerned.
Well, thank you very much for this question about Mrs. Kleinberg, and you in the middle, microphone. I only want to say that among the different working groups, committees we have, there is one committee called Committee on the Holocaust, Genocide Prevention and Crimes Against Humanity. And in the text, also the text that is now under elaboration to be adopted probably at the Luxembourg Championships, there is also this time of genocide prevention and the Holocaust. I mean, we can't say you take it. There is a warning and it will happen like it happened. But there are some lessons we can draw from the Holocaust and be instrumental in communicating with those in other areas of the world that are facing these difficulties. Not later than last week, I got from Jerusalem, from the founder, if you want. If there is one name to be mentioned, it's the great Israeli historian Yehuda Bauer. By all means, not always in the favors of the government in place in Jerusalem or in Tel Aviv. And Yehuda Bauer, once again, that we have closer relations with GAMAC, which is an organization that it has to do with all these other atrocities. And I don't know whether, because we are working by consensus, but I only want to give assurance to Mrs. Kleinberg that this is really an issue, and also in our vision statement, a world without genocide. It's the vision statement. It is not only looking at, but nevertheless, it has been mentioned 2,000 years, the pogroms, all over in our societies, in all our societies, who had Jewish communities. Despite the fact that the contribution of the Jewish people is so overwhelmingly important, disproportionately important in all our societies, we have had that. And 5.7, 5.8, for the moment only 4.4 million are accounted for, but yes, it's perhaps less than 6 million, but what is the difference between 5.7 and 5.8? And we are discussing a problem where we are speaking about conspiracy, the world Jewish capital with dominating the world, and so on, so on. Now, have we not heard that already? So, what is the lesson we draw individually, and what is the lesson we tolerate in the speeches on the internet and in the public? Naturally, the politics have lowered the threshold of the language we use. And it's dreadful, because if we see, first, the internet has given the possibility to connect. But secondly, if politicians, as they are in several countries, on whatever wing, use a language, naturally, if they use it, if in parliament, in some parliament, you can use a certain language, well, who is wondering about that? These tendencies are also, and even then amplified, in media among commoners. So, my insurance, yes, it is, but Cambodia, I mean, yes, I always told, when I went to Mauthausen or to Sachsenhausen, I told those political prisoners, I said, you have a moral authority and credibility to stand up and to warn, because what you suffered, because at that time, when I was ambassador in Vienna, in Mauthausen, there were many still alive. But I say again, this is something, Cambodia is a good example. I mean, Armenia is another one. There are all others. Because Armenia is something, Turkey is an observer state. I can't imagine that an observer state who wants to apply for full membership of IRA and has not recognized 1.5 million that have been killed in 1915 can, to my opinion, not join IRA as a full member, full stop. Whether it can join the European Union, I mean, I have my opinion. I will not share it now. As I say,
But I mean, so we are fully aware. But again, please, on Mrs. Kleinberg's statement, we have tendencies in our societies that demonstrate to us that, in fact, we haven't learned the lesson. And we are still at the beginning, but there's something like an avalanche of negative trends, which comes out of all the analyses and the data collections. So let's raise, and therefore also I was happy that the Prime Minister said we should take the presidency of the IRA, because it has to do that in all our societies, and this is not a country where problems are in this aspect very, very big. But beware of the beginnings is what we always said. And therefore, my final word would be, this is something, again, where the whole society has to stand up. And not one other. You know, when we again have in our societies a tendency, there's an English word for it. I read it in the debate on the Labour Party, and I didn't know it. It comes from sociology. And it has, the term is otherism. Otherism. So once you define our Jewish compatriots and somebody different, then you are running into the trouble we have seen for centuries. And this is again what is happening to quite a lot of examples and instances, and we have to stand up again and fight it.
Thank you. I think that is a strong closing word, but by both of you. I realize we have about 5 or 6 for that. It's true, but we're already 10 minutes above the timing, and therefore, but we can't. We're 10 minutes above. So what we can do, and that's what I wanted to say, is I've got 3 closing words as moderator. The best thing that can happen to you as a moderator is if the discussion wants to go on, and you don't actually have to keep it going. I'm sure that both of you will still be here for a few minutes so that we can bilaterally continue to talk. But I would like to congratulate Jürgen Bacchus because it shows that this topic is of high relevance, not only to us from our perspective, but also to you as citizens, and that was the idea of the Citizens Dialogue. And my guess is it's not the last time that we will be dealing with this topic because of that. A second point I would like to make is, and again it is a congratulation in a way, is at the moment one could spend nearly every second day in an event that the Commission representative is organizing here. I would like to highlight one final one on Friday of this week. Commission President Juncker will be here speaking about Europe and its role in maintaining peace on at 7:30 in the evening Friday in the Trifonion in Echternach. You still can register, either online or if you maybe mention it on the way out. And the third is, and I think that's the most important, even if we don't always agree on all positions that were exchanged today, possibly, I think it is very illustrative how much you are motivated in both your work and how difficult your jobs are, but I'm very grateful that you took the time to talk to citizens and to share your views the last 1.5 hours, so please join me in a round of applause for my 2 speakers. Thank you for your interest. Safely, and if you still have some questions on a one-to-one level, those important vote on as has been said several times, in case you missed it, next Sunday, 26, go vote.